Be me, Riker. I'm a master craftsman. Not trying to sound arrogant, that's just what I do. My world is steel, wood, and fire. I lead a team in a workshop that builds massive, one-of-a-kind architectural installations. Think giant metal sculptures for corporate lobbies or complex wood fixtures for mansions that look like they were grown by elves. It's hard, honest work. You need skill, you need strength, and most of all, you need a team you can trust. And for the longest time, I had exactly that. Our workshop wasn't just a place to clock in. It was a sanctuary from all the noise of the outside world. The air always smelled of ozone from the welders, freshly cut oak, and machine oil. The soundtrack was the hiss of a plasma torch, the roar of the CNC machine, and the constant low-level banter of good men at work. There were about a dozen of us, a tight crew. Dallas was my right hand, a big guy, a brilliant welder, with a laugh that could shake dust from the rafters. He was the kind of guy who'd bust your chops all day long, but would be the first one there if your car broke down at 2 a.m. The rest of the guys were the same mold, solid, dependable, professionals. We functioned like a single organism. I could be grinding a joint on one side of the shop, and I'd know just by the sound of the saw on the other side if a cut was going wrong. Someone would just appear with the right tool before you even had to ask for it. We didn't need meetings to coordinate. We just knew. It was a flow, a rhythm we'd built over years. And then there was Bailey. Bailey was our project manager. She was the bridge between our chaotic workshop and the high-end clients with their fancy blueprints and impossible deadlines. She'd been with us for years, started as an assistant, and just proved she was sharper and more organized than anyone else. She wasn't one of the guys, she was just Bailey, part of the team. She'd walk into the workshop, clipboard in hand, weaving between sparks from a grinder and stacks of raw steel without flinching. She knew the name of every tool, the properties of every material we worked with. Dallas would give her hell, of course. "Morning, sunshine. Here to grace us peasants with your presence?" And she'd fire right back without missing a beat. "Just making sure you're welding the right pieces together, Dallas. Wouldn't want the client's multi-million-dollar sculpture to look like one of your failed art projects." We'd all chuckle. It was part of the routine. The respect was there because she earned it, every single day. She fought for us with clients, got us deadline extensions when we needed them, and understood that sometimes genius takes an extra hour. In return, we'd pull all-nighters to make sure her projects came in on time, looking perfect. It was a balanced ecosystem. We worked hard, we joked around, we respected each other based on skill and character. It was simple. It worked. I guess it was too simple for the modern world. The trouble started a few months back. I think it was late spring, when the big doors of the shop were open to let the breeze in. Our boss, Julius, sold a minority stake in the company to some new investment firm. We didn't think much of it at first. Julius told us it was good news. Capital for new equipment, bigger projects. Julius is a decent guy at heart. He started the business with his own two hands, came from the shop floor himself, but he'd gotten soft over the years. More of a businessman than a craftsman now. He started talking about things like corporate synergy and optimizing our brand presence. We just nodded and went back to work. The first sign that something was really wrong was the mandatory all-hands meeting. We never had those. If Julius needed to tell us something, he'd just walk onto the shop floor and tell us. But this was an email. Mandatory meeting. Introduction of new team member. We all gathered in the break room, wiping grease off our hands. The air was thick with suspicion. Julius stood at the front, looking like a man about to apologize for hitting your dog. He was fidgeting with his tie, sweating a little, and next to him stood a woman we'd never seen before. Her name was Piper. She was probably in her late 20s, dressed in a severe business suit that looked completely alien in our world of steel-toed boots and sawdust. She wasn't looking at us. She was looking through us. Her eyes scanned the room with an expression I couldn't quite place at first. It was a mixture of pity and disgust, like a health inspector finding a rat in a kitchen. Julius cleared his throat. He gave this rambling speech about how the new investors were helping the company enter the 21st century, how it wasn't just about the product we make, but about the culture we create. He used the word inclusive about 17 times. Then he gestured towards the woman. This was Piper, our new first-ever head of human resources. She was here to help us navigate the complexities of the modern workplace, and ensure our company was a safe and equitable environment for everyone. The silence in the room was heavy enough to bend steel. Then Piper stepped forward to speak. Her voice was sharp, clinical, like a newscaster reporting on a distant tragedy. She informed us that she had audited our company's cultural landscape and identified several areas of concern. She mentioned the lack of diversity, the pervasively masculine environment, and the potential for unexamined biases. She said all this while looking at a room full of men who worked, ate, and bled together, and at Bailey, who was standing in the back, looking utterly confused. Piper finished by saying she was excited to begin the work of re-educating and realigning our team to meet modern standards. She didn't smile once. The meeting ended. We shuffled out of the break room like men walking away from a car wreck. Nobody said anything. We just went back to our stations. But the rhythm was gone. The air was different. The poison had been introduced into the system. The next day, the posters appeared. They were plastered all over the break room, by the water cooler, even in the damn bathroom. Glossy, corporate-looking posters with bland stock photos of diverse people smiling. And the text. Is your joke funny, or is it a microaggression? Silence is compliance. Check your privilege. It felt like being scolded by a passive-aggressive ghost. Dallas saw the one in the bathroom, came out shaking his head. He just looked at me and said, "What in the hell is happening, Riker?" I didn't have an answer. Then the emails started. Company-wide memos from Piper, sent out every other day. Links to articles about mansplaining, statistics on gender inequality in the trades, and reminders about using gender-neutral language. We were instructed to stop calling each other guys and instead use team or folks. It was absurd. We ignored it, mostly. But it was there, a constant low-level hum of accusation. Piper would walk through the shop floor. She never spoke to any of us. She just walked slowly with her clipboard, making notes. She'd stop and watch us work, her head tilted. You could feel her judgment from across the room. If a few of us were laughing at something, her eyes would narrow. She'd make a note. The easy camaraderie we had started to curdle. Jokes became quieter. The banter started to die down. You'd start a sentence and then second-guess yourself. Was that okay to say? Was she listening? It was like a switch had been flipped. The light and warmth of the place were dimming. Bailey felt it too. She tried to keep things normal, but it was hard. She'd come out to ask a question, and the guys would be more reserved, more formal. The easy back and forth was gone, replaced by a cautious, sterile politeness. She asked me about it one afternoon. "What's going on with everyone, Riker? It feels like a library in here." I just pointed towards Piper's new office, which used to be our storage closet. "She's what's going on." Bailey sighed. She knew. She was just as uncomfortable as we were. Piper's whole mission was supposedly to make the workplace better for her. But she had never once asked Bailey what she thought or felt. It was never about Bailey. It was about Piper's crusade. The first big explosion was the toxic masculinity workshop. Attendance was mandatory, for men only. Bailey was explicitly told she wasn't invited, which she found both insulting and hilarious. So we all filed into the break room again one afternoon. The posters on the wall seemed to mock us. Piper stood in front of a projector screen, a remote in her hand. "Good afternoon, team," she said, using the word like it was a medical instrument. For the next hour, she subjected us to a PowerPoint presentation that was so disconnected from our reality, it felt like it was beamed from another planet. She showed us slides with cartoon drawings of angry-looking men. She talked about how things like emotional stoicism, self-reliance, and being protective were not virtues but pillars of a toxic system. She told us that the way we communicated, the jokes we told, the very fact that we were a close-knit group of men were all symptoms of a problematic culture. We just sat there, in our work clothes, smelling of sweat and metal, listening to this woman in a pantsuit tell us that our entire way of being was wrong. Most of the guys just zoned out, stared at the wall. But I could see Dallas simmering. His knuckles were white where he gripped his coffee mug. About 45 minutes in, Piper put up a slide about manspreading. Dallas finally broke. He didn't shout. He just raised his hand like we were in school. Piper looked annoyed, but she called on him. "Dallas." "Yeah, I have a question, he said, his voice dangerously calm. I spend 10 hours a day crouched in a steel hull, welding seams over my head. My back is shot, my knees are screaming, and I've got burns on my arms that'll never fade. Can you explain to me how the way I sit on a bus is more important than whether or not this multi-ton sculpture we're building is going to collapse and kill someone? The room was dead silent. Piper's face didn't change. She didn't get angry. She got colder. Thank you for sharing, Dallas, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. That kind of defensive reaction and whataboutism is a classic sign of male fragility. It's an area we'll need to work on. She clicked to the next slide without another word. She had taken his genuine, work-related point and turned it into a psychological failing on his part. She didn't debate him. She diagnosed him. That was the moment I knew this wasn't about making things better. This was about power. This was an ideological conquest. We were the natives, and she was the missionary here to save our heathen souls, whether we wanted her to or not. After that workshop, things got worse. Dallas was written up for disruptive behavior. Piper now had her first official enemy, and it emboldened her. She started implementing new rules. All project discussions had to be formally scheduled through her to ensure all voices were heard equally. Any dispute between team members, no matter how minor, had to be mediated by HR. She was inserting herself into the very bloodstream of our workflow. The fluid organic process that made us so good at what we did was being choked by bureaucracy. A simple problem that Dallas and I could have solved in 30 seconds with a piece of chalk on the floor now required a series of emails and a scheduled meeting. Productivity started to dip. Deadlines started to feel tighter. The pressure was building. The mood was turning grim. We were no longer a team. We were just a collection of individuals working in the same building, watched by a warden. And then she brought out her masterpiece, the thing that would finally break us. It was a Monday morning, another mandatory meeting. This time, Bailey was required to be there. Piper stood at the front of the room with a stack of papers in her hand. She had a strange, triumphant gleam in her eye. Team, she began. As part of our ongoing commitment to fostering a truly respectful workplace, we are implementing a new initiative. She held up one of the papers. This is the Pledge of Respect. It's a personal commitment from each of our male employees to uphold the values of this company and ensure the psychological safety of their female colleagues. She began to hand them out. I took the sheet of paper. My blood ran cold as I read it. It wasn't a pledge, it was a confession. It was a document written from a position of assumed guilt. I remember some of the lines verbatim. They're burned into my memory. It started, I, the undersigned, acknowledge that as a man in a male-dominated industry, I have benefited from systemic privileges that have historically disadvantaged women. That was the preamble. It got worse. There was a list of commitments. I pledge to actively listen to women's voices and to validate their lived experiences without question. I pledge to be an ally and to call out sexism and microaggressions, even when they are subtle or unintentional. I pledge to be conscious of the physical and verbal space I occupy and to ensure I am not creating an intimidating environment. In any professional disagreement with a female colleague, I will begin by assuming her perspective is valid and defer to her expertise. The last one was the killer. It was a loyalty oath to an ideology, disguised as a workplace policy. It effectively meant that in any dispute, Bailey would be automatically right, and we would be automatically wrong. It stripped away professionalism and replaced it with a hierarchy based on gender. I looked over at Bailey. Her face was pale. She was staring at the document in her hands, horrified. This wasn't for her. This was about Piper proving a point. I looked around at the other guys. Their faces were stone. And then I looked at Dallas. He was reading the paper, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching. He slowly crumpled the paper into a ball in his fist. He looked up, not at Piper, but at Julius, who was standing in the corner, trying to look invisible. "You cannot be serious," Dallas said, his voice low and shaking with rage. "You want me to sign a piece of paper that says I'm a walking problem just because I was born a man? You want me to sign something that says my professional opinion is worth less than Bailey's, not because she's better at the job, but just because she's a woman? Do you know how insulting that is to her? We respect Bailey because she's a damn good project manager, not because of this condescending garbage." He threw the crumpled ball of paper on the floor. "I'm not signing it." A few other guys murmured in agreement. A small spark of rebellion flickered in the room. Piper didn't flinch. She had been waiting for this. She turned her cold eyes on Dallas and then addressed Julius. "Julius, as you know, our investors are very particular about compliance with DEI initiatives. A refusal to sign this document is a direct refusal to comply with company policy." She let that hang in the air for a moment. "It is, by definition, an act of insubordination and contributes to a hostile work environment. I will have to document this refusal in my report. I can't imagine the investors would be pleased to hear that their new acquisition is non-compliant with the standards they set. The legal exposure alone could be catastrophic." It was a threat, pure and simple, clean, corporate, and utterly brutal. She was threatening to burn the whole company down to get her way. Julius turned a shade of gray I'd never seen before. He looked at Dallas. He looked at the rest of us. There was no strength in his eyes, only fear. He was a captain, ready to hand his ship over to the pirates to save his own skin. Just sign the paper, Dallas," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's just words. Don't make trouble." The spark of rebellion died. Betrayal is a cold, heavy thing. It settled over the room like a shroud. Our boss had chosen the ideologue over his own men. Dallas stared at Julius for a long moment. His face was a mask of contempt and disappointment. He looked older. He slowly bent down, picked up the crumpled paper, and smoothed it out on the table. He didn't say another word. All eyes turned to me. As the lead, they were waiting for my move. I looked at the pledge in my hand, this vile little document, this loyalty oath. And I looked at the faces of my crew, men I'd worked with for a decade, men I trusted with my life around heavy machinery. I saw their anger, their humiliation, and their helplessness. Protesting was useless. She had us. Any resistance would just be used as further proof that we were the toxic men she claimed we were. We were in a cage. There was no way to fight. But we didn't have to like it. I picked up the pen. I met the eyes of every man in that room, one by one. I held their gaze for a second. It was a silent message, a new pledge, one that wasn't written down. An understanding passed between us. Okay. They want compliance? We'll give them compliance, exactly what they ask for, nothing more, nothing less. I signed the paper. My signature was neat, precise, and dead. One by one, the rest of the men stepped forward and did the same. The only sound in the room was the scratching of pens on paper. It was the sound of a team dying. When the last man signed, Piper collected the sheets with a small, satisfied smile. She had won. She had no idea what she had just unleashed. The next morning was the first day of our new world. I walked into the workshop, and the silence was the first thing I noticed. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, dead quiet. The only sounds were the hum of the ventilation and the clank of metal on metal. The soul of the place was gone. The guys were already there, working. No one was talking. Each man was an island, focused entirely on his own task. When Bailey came in, a coffee in her hand, she gave her usual cheerful, "Morning, everyone." What she got back was a perfectly synchronized, monotone chorus. "Good morning, Ms. Bailey." The words were polite. The tone was a wall of ice. She stopped, confused. The smile faltered on her face. She walked over to Dallas's station. He was inspecting a weld, his helmet flipped up. She tried to keep it light. "Big plans for the weekend, Dallas?" He didn't look up from his work. "My personal schedule does not impact my professional duties, Ms. Bailey." He switched on his welder and lowered his helmet. Conversation over. Bailey just stood there for a second, completely lost. She looked at me for help. I just gave her a slight shrug and went back to sharpening a drill bit. This was the world Piper wanted. This was the world she was getting. We were compliant, perfectly, professionally, brutally compliant. All the little things that made the workshop function disappeared overnight. The extra set of hands that would just appear when you were lifting something heavy, gone. Now you had to formally request assistance. The quick brainstorming sessions over a piece of scrap metal to solve a complex problem, gone. Now it was submit a query. The shared pot of coffee that someone would always brew, it sat empty. Everyone brought their own thermos. We were a collection of contractors, not a team. The real test came a few days later. We were starting on the Vanguard project. It was our biggest commission to date, a massive twisted metal sculpture for the lobby of some tech giant. It was complex, ambitious, and had a razor-thin margin for error. Bailey was the lead manager on it. I was going over the main structural blueprints, and I found a problem, a big one. A critical support joint was designed with a standard load-bearing bracket. My calculations showed it wouldn't hold. Under stress, the whole thing could buckle. Before, I would have walked over to Bailey, grabbed a piece of soapstone, and we would have sketched out a solution on the floor in 5 minutes. But that was the old world. I walked back to my station. I sat down at the old computer we used for inventory. I opened my email. I typed out a formal memo. To Piper, HR, Bailey, Project Manager. CC, Julius, Owner. Subject. Observation regarding Blueprint B7, Vanguard Project. Body. This memo is to formally document an observation regarding the structural plans for the Vanguard project. A potential stress point has been identified at Joint B7. As per the company policy outlined in the signed Pledge of Respect, I am deferring to the project manager's expertise and will proceed with the current design unless a formal, written directive to the contrary is issued. Please advise. I hit send, and then I instructed my team to halt all work on that section of the sculpture. We moved on to polishing other components. The heart of the project sat untouched. An hour later, Bailey came storming over, her face flushed with anger and confusion. She was holding her phone with my email on the screen. Riker, what is this? A potential stress point? Just tell me what's wrong. I turned to her, my expression neutral. It's all in the report, Ms. Bailey. I have followed protocol. Protocol? We don't have a protocol for this. We talk to each other. Just show me the problem. I cannot, I said calmly. The pledge I signed obligates me to validate your lived experience and defer to your expertise. Questioning your blueprint would be a direct violation of that pledge. I am not comfortable creating a hostile work environment. I used her own weaponized language against her. She stared at me, her mouth open. She looked like I had slapped her. She realized we weren't just being quiet. We were actively using the rules Piper had created to grind the whole operation to a halt. She spun around and marched towards Piper's office. The rest of the week was a slow-motion disaster. Bailey was in a state of quiet panic. She couldn't get a straight answer out of anyone. Every question was met with a polite, formal, and utterly useless response that usually involved the phrase, "as per company policy." The Vanguard project was bleeding time and money. Piper, of course, was completely blind to the real problem. In her mind, the silence and lack of cooperation wasn't a reaction to her policies. It was proof that her policies were necessary. She saw it as male sulking and weaponized incompetence. Her solution, as always, was more HR. She scheduled another mandatory meeting. This one was a voluntary sharing circle designed to rebuild trust. We all sat in a circle of chairs in the break room. Bailey was there, looking exhausted. Piper was at the head, radiating smug therapeutic authority. I know there has been some tension lately, she began. This is a safe space to share our feelings without judgment. Who would like to begin? Silence. The only sound was the buzzing of the refrigerator. Piper's smile tightened. Okay, I'll start. I feel that some of you are resistant to positive change, and it makes me feel unsafe. More silence. She finally pointed at Dallas. Dallas, why don't you share what you're feeling right now? Dallas looked at the ceiling for a long moment, as if gathering his thoughts. Then he looked directly at Piper, his face completely devoid of emotion. I am feeling a strong sense of motivation, he said, his voice a flat monotone. I am motivated to complete my assigned tasks within the designated work hours, in accordance with the company handbook and all recently implemented HR policies. A few of the guys coughed to hide their laughter. Piper's face fell. She didn't know how to respond to that. He was giving her perfect corporate-approved nonsense. She tried to recover. That's great, Dallas. But what about on an emotional level? My emotional state is optimally calibrated for workplace productivity, he replied without blinking. The meeting was a complete farce. Piper ended it early, looking flustered for the first time since she'd arrived. She had tried to fight a fire with gasoline, and now the whole house was burning down around her, and she still couldn't smell the smoke. The day of reckoning arrived the following week. The client from the Vanguard project was coming for a site visit, a man named Mr. Davis. We were hopelessly behind schedule. The main sculpture was a skeleton of its former self, with the most critical part sitting untouched. Julius was a nervous wreck. Piper kept reassuring him that this was just a transitional period in a cultural realignment. Mr. Davis arrived. He wasn't a slick executive. He was an older man, an engineer by trade, with hands that had seen real work and eyes that missed nothing. He walked in, took one look at the sculpture, and his face hardened. He didn't speak to Julius or Bailey. He walked the perimeter of the project, his footsteps echoing in the quiet workshop. He stopped right in front of the problematic joint. He squinted at it, then tapped the inadequate bracket with his pen. "This is wrong," he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the entire shop. "This is a standard bracket on a primary load-bearing joint. The specs call for a custom-forged gusset. Why is this work not done?" Julius started stammering. "Well, we've had some internal process revisions." Mr. Davis cut him off, not even looking at him. He looked directly at me. "You," he said, pointing at me. "You're the lead craftsman. You look like you know what you're doing. Tell me why my $500,000 sculpture is being held together with a piece of hardware I could buy at a home improvement store." Every eye in the workshop was on me. This was it. The moment of truth. I took a breath. "Sir, we identified that issue on the blueprints last week," I said, my voice steady and clear. "A formal report was filed with management requesting a directive. We are still waiting for that directive. My team does not proceed on a project of this scale without proper authorization." Mr. Davis's eyes narrowed. He turned his gaze from me to Julius and Piper. "You're telling me you've been sitting on a critical structural flaw for a week because you were waiting on a memo?" he asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Are you building a sculpture or a bureaucracy?" He turned back to Julius. "I'm pulling my contract. My lawyers will be in touch." And with that, he turned and walked out of the workshop. The sound of the door closing was like a gunshot. Julius looked like he'd been punched in the gut. All the blood drained from his face. He looked around, wild-eyed, and his fear finally turned to anger. "What have you done?" he screamed at us, at the whole room. "What is wrong with you people? Why can't you just do your jobs?" That was the final straw for Dallas. He walked over to the bulletin board where a copy of the pledge was pinned. He ripped it off the board, marched over to Julius, and slapped it down on the workbench in front of him. "This is what's wrong," Dallas roared, his voice echoing in the silence. "This is what's wrong with us. You stood there and let this woman call us all broken. You made us sign this piece of garbage that says we're guilty until proven innocent. You wanted us to stop being a team and start being compliant little robots who just follow orders? Well, congratulations, Julius. You got what you wanted." Piper stepped forward, her face a mask of outrage. "This is a completely unacceptable outburst of male aggression. I am documenting this." But before she could say another word, Bailey spoke up. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through everything. "He's right." Everyone stopped. Everyone looked at her. "He's right, Julius," she said again, her eyes filled with a sad, fierce clarity. "This is your fault. And Piper, you didn't help me. You used me as a weapon. You came in here and broke the best, most functional team I have ever been a part of because you care more about your ideology than you do about people. This place wasn't toxic. You made it toxic." The silence that followed was absolute. Piper stood there, speechless, as her entire narrative, her whole reason for being, was dismantled by the very person she was supposedly protecting. Julius looked from Dallas's furious face to Bailey's disappointed one. He looked at the rest of us, standing silent, our faces like stone, and for the first time, he seemed to finally understand. He wasn't looking at employees anymore. He was looking at the wreckage of what he had built. He looked at Piper, and all the fear was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by a cold, hard anger. "Piper, my office, now." She tried to argue, but he just pointed. She walked into his office. He followed and closed the door. We all just stood there, waiting. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Piper walked out, holding a small cardboard box with a plant and a picture frame in it. Her face was pale and tight. She wouldn't look at anyone. She walked through the workshop and out the front door without a word. Julius came out of his office. He looked 10 years older. He walked over to the workbench, picked up the pledge Dallas had thrown down. He looked at all of us. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was quiet. "I screwed up. I was a coward. I let someone from the outside tear us apart." He tore the pledge in half, then in half again, and dropped the pieces into a trash can. He looked at me. "Riker, can you fix this? The project?" I looked at the guys. I saw the anger in their eyes finally starting to fade, replaced by a weary relief. I looked at Bailey, who gave me a small, hopeful nod. "Yeah, Julius," I said. "We can fix it." The next morning, I walked into the workshop. The first thing I heard was Dallas telling a terrible joke, and Bailey groaning in response. The smell of fresh coffee was in the air. The rhythm was back. We had a hell of a job ahead of us to save the Vanguard project. But we were a team again, and we'd be okay.